Our next speaker is a young leader from our community. He was actually elected to the city council when he was in student college in Williamsburg, Virginia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Benming Zhang.
While I was setting it up, I was told that the president had decided to cancel the coffee break, so I'm your caffeine for this afternoon. Before I begin, I just wanted to thank the Chinese American Alliance, President Andy Zhang, Chuck Lee, also a dear friend of mine, Professor Kai Zhang. Thank you very much for inviting me, this 24-year-old person, Southern country lawyer from small town Williamsburg, Virginia, to share some folksy tales about how I got elected, and hopefully you'll be able to take some lessons away with your movement as well, which I think is very important and a tremendous effort by you all. So give yourselves a round of applause. I just wanted to also recognize my mother, Zhang, and also my younger sister, Zhang. That's a good segue to talking about me. So I think I was grappling with what's the best way to convey a message to you all here today. We politicians talk a lot. We like talking about ourselves a lot. But the most important thing for me, for wanting you guys to take away something from this, is lessons from my own campaign. And the Holy Bible instructs the Word of God through stories, because stories reveal the full humanity of us all and the characters. So let's begin with me. Not to say that part of the Holy Bible, but begin with me. I'm a second generation Chinese American. They call me ABCs, or a banana. My parents immigrated from China, from Beijing, China. We are of Hokkien heritage, and we're very proud of being Hokkaians. My father received a research fellowship. He taught himself English in China as a surgeon, and he decided to take this research fellowship to study genetic therapy research at Johns Hopkins University. Now, on the year that he was supposed to come back, the Tiananmen Square massacre happened, and as you all know, diplomatic relations were stopped by then President George H.W. Bush. My mom was still stuck in China at the time, because it was just my father that received the research opportunity. So he was presented with an opportunity to have a green card. He wasn't like any other immigrant story, where he tried to escape or seek a new life, a new adventure in another country. This simply happened because of this historical events. The time was right. He was there, and he was offered a chance to become an American, and he took it. And later, when relations got better, my mother joined him and became United States citizens, and we are still proud citizens to this day. So I went to the College of William & Mary as an undergraduate, and I got involved in local government, but I didn't really come to college getting involved with local government. I mean, who goes to college saying, I want to do local city council politics? It's all about Congress, it's all about state politics. Who cares about the local government? But I got involved through very simple means. People ask me often, how did you get involved in politics? For me, I just volunteered at the presidential elections for 2012. It was the first time I could vote. I had an opportunity to work as a volunteer to see how it was like to be able to vote, and I took that opportunity. And from there on, I met people who saw that I was interested, at least a little bit interested, and they asked me to get involved with local politics. So some facts about the city of Williamsburg. Students comprise about 43% of my city's voting population. Students have the right to vote in my state, pursuant to a former governor's actions in 2007. He also ran for vice president, but he lost. That's okay. Students have a sizable influence in the city if they wanted to. And we have a long history of students running for city council. To this day, there have only been 2 people that have been able to get elected to city council. My predecessor, Scott Foster, and myself in 2016. Now, it's been a long time of a movement. It came around when the city started evicting student rentals, when noise violations were at all-time high, Now, some of this, it might speak to your issues and you may disagree, but that's okay. This is talking about how a group of students formed a movement to get involved with their local community, which I think is an important lesson to take from this. Students also saw the fact that they were over half of the just about half of the city's population, but there wasn't enough stuff to do around town. I mean, if you think about Williamsburg, you've got the College of William and Mary, and we've got the very famous Colonial Williamsburg Foundation Museum. There are not really any restaurants, bars, any fun entertainment stuff that younger folks liked. They wanted to see more things like that. So they ran a bunch of students, and by 2010, the first student got elected to the Williamsburg City Council. Now let me tell you a little bit about him, because he and I are very different politically. But we all often wonder about challenging stereotypes, right? That's the talk. That's my topic for today. The question then becomes, why the hell would you elect a 21-year-old to office? What kind of life experience can you have or possibly contribute to your city's vibrancy? That's a very good question. But it also precedes the question of how the folks who are able to succeed, we have to become models for those in the future that want to seek office as well. And that's what Scott did. Scott made it possible for me to be able to get elected, to make a case for students. He became articulate. One of the beauties of local government is that you can't really make stuff up. You have to know exactly the issues of why you want to get people to vote for it. I wish this happened for Congress and the state, but it doesn't. You know, you get people who say, I want more government or I want lower government, but how? And in local government, you have to explain how. So for Scott, and even in my campaign, it turned out that we knew more about the city issues than even the longtime residents who lived there for 20 years. They've never been to a single city council meeting, but we have in our past 3 years of getting involved. And that's what's important for us. A second point to that is that Scott was very mature. He was extremely mature in working with 4 other members of council. By the way, all his colleagues were 70-plus-year-olds. They were mystified by this 22-year-old. Why would they want to work with him? It was a very interesting, perplexing thing, but he was able to manage it because he was patient, he exhibited leadership skills, and when times got tough, when his colleagues said, you're absolutely wrong, I'm older than you, you've got more experience, he gave them the facts, and they spoke about truth. He gave them the truth of the matter. So, because of Scott, we've been able to push more students to get involved in the city. Our Planning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, they allowed for me, a Chinese American student, undergrad, to have a chance to run for office 6 years later. So that's an important aspect to learning how to challenge stereotypes. And I'll leave you with one more story on this. It's really interesting. I'm in the law school right now at William and Mary. And one of my professors is a Virginia Supreme Court justice. And he brought up an example about the Constitution. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 2. About how people who run for higher office, like Congress, you've got to be at least 25 years old. And he says, why would you want to elect anyone younger than 25? They're rash, they're aggressive, they're immature, they're super naive. And then my classmates couldn't help but laugh in the class because I'm in his class. And then he said, why are you laughing? And then he looks at me and says, oh shit. But I think to that point, if the more examples that you can put out there of involvement, the more that you can beat back that stereotype and also that presumption. And the presumption today is that Chinese Americans don't get involved in politics. And this group, the Chinese American Alliance, is proving that otherwise. And you guys should be commended for your efforts. Make sure I don't want to take up too much of your time. The last thing is about Asian Americans. So another thing about, with my heritage, obviously I'm Chinese, right? That's not really a hidden fact. But in the city of Williamsburg, uniquely enough, it's only about 7% Asian Americans population. Most of it is actually white. And most of them, as I alluded to before, are 60-plus years old, besides the transient student population we have in college. So the fundamental question for me then, when I considered running, was why would I run in this city, where there's only 7% Asian Americans? In fact, I had to challenge this very stereotype with my own family when I considered running. I remember distinctly in the kitchen, I asked my father, who was a pediatric surgeon over in New York. We are New York natives from Long Island. You can hear it come out. I asked him, should I run for office in Williamsburg, Virginia? And he said, no. Come back to New York. Represent your Chinese-American constituency. Why would any old white person ever want to vote for you in Williamsburg, Virginia, in the South? It's not, well, it's kind of a hurtful question, but it spoke to a truth that needed to be turned over as well. You know, I think a lot of us do based on, and this ties in with the central theme about race-based relations. The reality of today is that race will be a predominant thing. I know there are a lot of folks, I've heard a lot of politicians say, let's get rid of the idea of race, let's go where everyone treats everyone the same. And you know, I have some mixed feelings about that, but I think with Williamsburg, it was about the ideas, it was about being focused on the issues, and I think I played up to my truth. I'm very proud of my Chinese-American heritage. For some people, and I think people often, whether you're in the right or in the left, mostly my friends in the left, who get so frustrated about the differences and explaining it, and it kind of speaks to the rhetoric of our nation today, not being able to have conversations and to talk about your own individual experiences. I'm going to watch Crazy Rich Asians differently than my white friend, classmate from the law school, but we can have conversations about that, and I think through my campaign, I could talk to a 70-year-old guy who fought in the Korean War. No reason for him to want to be friendly with a Chinese guy, and talk to a second-generation Chinese-American about the issues that matter to the city, and also why I'm proud of my own Chinese heritage. I think that's important, and I hope people here will not be dissuaded the fact of whether you're representing your community or not. Because I feel, even though my city is not predominantly Chinese-American, that I am representing my community in some way, and I hope more younger folks and Chinese-Americans will get involved in that way. So what's the takeaway with all this? Let me wrap this up. The first point that I think is really interesting and very important is that history ought to guide the narratives of our movements. So what do I mean by that? So I was an Asian American Studies major. I self-designed my major in college. And a lot of the stuff that we talk about, there's not really a liberal or conservative ideology with it. It was an interest in academic pedagogy, but the fundamental truth is we cannot ignore our history. A lot of the previous speakers have just alluded to this. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the ignorance of ignoring Chinese-American immigrant workers for intercontinental railroad, the right to vote in certain situations, how the presumptions of why Chinatowns came up in the United States. And one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet, we talked a lot about the Supreme Court today, one of the greatest evils as a law student and as an advocate of history is the Korematsu versus United States case. Now, let me tell you a little bit about this. This is when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the president, and he and the Department of Justice fabricated evidence that the Japanese were a threat. Japanese citizens, Asian Americans, fellow Asian Americans, were threats to the United States, and persuaded the Supreme Court to uphold the president's actions to inter Japanese Americans into concentration camps. Now, I don't know about what y'all think, because I know there's a lot of different opinions about this, and I don't know what your thoughts are about FDR, but based on what I know about this conservative organization, I hope that I think that you guys are not big fans of FDR, but I may be misguided on that. But that was the closest that the United States ever went into a dictatorship. So the point with being with the history, feeding into our own movement, is you have to understand that we have to speak up. Because if we are silent, Martin Luther King had this great quote when he signed a letter from Birmingham jails to pastors all around the United States, explaining why nonviolent demonstrations were necessary for his people. And he said, we cannot expect those in power to give us the things that we want. It takes a grassroots movement of the powerless to get that influence that we deserve, the rights that we deserve, and the voice that we deserve. So what does it come down to this? History feeds us, number one. But number two, you have to speak up Because if we are not involved, we cannot expect anyone else to do the work that we seek to do. Whether it's affirmative action, whether it's equal opportunities for Asian Americans, anywhere, business opportunities, we need your advocacy. And that is why I think the Chinese American Alliance, I'm so blessed to be able to be here today to join you all. And I hope you will convince our fellow Chinese Americans and just American citizens in general to advocate for the things that we truly believe, because history feeds our movement. Thank you very much.
That's a very inspirational speech, right? And I think Benming is also that very aspirational young leader. And he's actually 24 years old, 1 year away from being able to run for U.S. Congress, because you have to be 25. And 11 years away from to be able to run for U.S. President, because you have 35 years old.